Alex, I appreciate you accepting the invite to speak with me today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Lovely being here.
So, my journey into this topic of transition and detransition, it started several months ago with listening to a few Chloe Cole interviews. I'm sure you're probably familiar with her. That just kind of randomly popped up in my feed. And then shortly after that, it kind of piqued my interest. So I decided to actually type detransitioner into YouTube for the first time. And for whatever reason, the video where you describe in detail the kind of grueling process of your transition and your detransition, it popped up right at the very top of my feed. So after watching that, it kind of really had an effect on me, honestly. I think everyone who gets caught in this topic, we all kind of go through that stage where we want to hear the most intense, most vivid, disturbing detransitioner stories that we can find just because of how captivating it is. But I think ultimately there's probably enough of that on YouTube as is. I mean, your story's out there, plenty of other people's stories are out there. So I'm hoping we can kind of shift the discussion more towards the solutions now. So I will put a link at the bottom of the video that links to that original video that I'm talking about because I think you described it so well. But that being said, I still would like you to kind of lay out a simplified roadmap of the journey that you have gone through. You don't need to get into like kind of the deeper psychological
Mm.
issues at play, like the bullying, the mental illness, things like that. But just so the listeners have a feel of where you're coming from, kind of lay out a timeline of the steps you took to transition. Which ultimately led you to getting on a plane to Thailand to undergo a risky surgery and kind of a brief overview of the complications that came with that decision.
Yeah. Of course. Actually, before I'll do that, you said about the descriptions of the transition stories being a little extreme at times, and I realized that the very first video I did, and a couple of other videos, definitely like venture into that area, but a lot of the time, what I want to present like is the realism of what is actually like happening, but like without unnecessarily dramatizing it. And I think media loves drama and over dramatizing of this. But yeah, long story short, I think the first time I experienced any um, symptoms of gender dysphoria, I was in very, very early childhood towards my own sexual organs, but not necessarily towards anything else. The rest started developing as in my teen years, I started to feel like I wasn't good enough to be a man. And so at the age of 16, I decided to transition. And then I first went on estrogen in 20, 2012, I believe, when I was 19. That's when
No puberty blockers or anything like that.
I didn't go any puberty blockers before that, but I was taking testosterone blockers or puberty blockers, if you prefer to call it that. It's basically like almost the same substance. Like the point is to desensitize you to or lower your testosterone levels. So I was both on that and estrogen as well. So I went on estrogen for approximately almost 2 years before I went in for the surgery. And that surgery, well, it was the bottom surgery, also known as penile inversion surgery. The one I did was with scrotal graft as well. Um, regarding the complications, I'm not sure how much you want me to go into details because some of those details can be quite gory.
I think just give the listener kind of a feel. I think mostly just the regret that you felt kind of instantaneously. I
Mm,
think because that's kind of important to show your mindset and show that
yeah,
um, it's not really like it wasn't. It pretty much didn't work for you like from the start.
yeah. So, well, when it comes to regret regarding surgery, I definitely felt it like immediately after the surgery, or perhaps even before the surgery. But I decided to go for it anyway because I felt like I had to, because I've already come so far, and I really didn't want. I wanted to disprove what my parents were saying, that it's just a phase, right? So like, I'm going to prove it's not just a phase, and I'm taking it very, very seriously. And so, yeah, the regret just hits you right away when it happens. It's You're just asking yourself, what the hell have I done, right? But I think we can separate between the surgery regret and the transition regret as a whole, because I don't think I ever experienced transition regret necessarily, and I didn't detransition right immediately after the surgery. It still took me like almost, yeah, 1 more year to actually detransition after the surgery.
So I was listening to your interview with Richie this morning, actually, and he said something I thought was pretty interesting on the topic of regret. He said when he tried to communicate his regret to his therapist post transition, she told him that in fact it wasn't regret, but it was actually OCD that he was experiencing. So he said a very powerful line. He said, "I was robbed of even regret." I know you said you experienced regret immediately after the surgery, but did you also experience any resistance, whether that be from therapists, parents, friends, when you tried to express that regret?
Not really. I wasn't really in contact with any therapists or doctors at the time. I just didn't want to have anything to do with anything medical at that point. So I was pretty much left on my own, and it was very hard for me to even talk to a psychologist, because the healthcare system in Norway is as almost as bad as it can be, honestly. So it's I didn't actually get to talk to a therapist until, I believe, 5 years later for the first time. And I never talked to anyone about the feeling of regret, whether it comes to surgery or transition. I just sort of wanted to go back to my normal life. I didn't really want to reveal too much. If anyone was curious about my androgynous appearance, I would just tell them that I was born intersex, and that was sort of like an excuse to explain like why something is different about me, my looks and my body and things like that. But I never actually opened up about the transition until, well, fairly recently, actually, because before before I posted that video in May last year, 2023, I only told two of my friends. I mean, like
Oh,
1 week
wow.
before I made that video. So I had absolutely no one to talk to. But there's something else I can relate to when it comes to Rich's experience with a therapist, and that is I developed a lot of trauma after the surgery, because of the complications and the experience itself, right? Like it was a pretty violent medical incident. That's how I like to think about it, and well, the therapist I've been seeing basically reduced all my trauma to autism. Like, you don't
Mm.
have trauma; those are just symptoms of autism. They just may seem to you like trauma. So I think this sort of gaslighting is actually very, very, very common.
So one thing I find interesting about your story is even after all these years, you've come to a place where you aren't actually taking any hormones anymore. So your body is designed for testosterone, and you've made the decision to live as a man, but you're no longer producing any of that testosterone. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you've come to that decision to basically live hormone free.
Trial and error, really. Well, first of all, one thing you have to realize, that at that point when you have gone through a surgery like that, there is no healthy alternative you can choose, right? You just have to choose between the better of two or three evils. Really, that's what it boils down to. So, well, you face certain side effects and complications if you take synthetic estrogen or testosterone. You're also facing side effects if you do not choose to go on any hormones, and those include lower energy levels, higher risk of developing depression, as well as higher risk of developing osteoporosis. And I already like have some problems with my scale at this point, right? And I'm just 31. So, but how do we compare this to the effects of testosterone and estrogen? Well, those give you a higher chance of developing liver disease, heart disease, stroke, and so on. Though, like I said, there is no healthy alternative there. So I just had to choose what actually works best for me. And I realized that when I'm on estrogen, I develop a lot of brain fog. It feels like my brain isn't working properly when I'm on estrogen. When I'm on testosterone, I have too much of a sex drive, and my sex drive has been always like pathologically intense since basically at the moment I hit puberty. It got really, really bad, and it doesn't really allow me to function in my daily life because it's just bothering me all the time. So I realized, yeah, there is no healthy choice. So I think I'll settle for that, which makes me feel most comfortable with myself. And, I like to focus on a lot of on philosophy and a lot of like academic stuff. So I think I have most freedom to do that when I do not experience brain fog and when my brain is not thinking about sex 24/7. So I think it's a place of comfort in general when I'm not on any hormones. And some people told me, "Oh, you should be. But it's not good for you." And yeah, they're right about that. But the alternative is not good for me either. And even if it costs me something, I think sometimes you have to make a choice that is best for you, even if
Hmm.
there are repercussions of that.
So the last thing I kind of want to get into about your story specifically, and you kind of already touched on this. Well, two things really, and they're kind of related. In one video, you said you had a difficult relationship with your dad, specifically around the topic of transitioning and talking about that with him. And then in another video, I heard you say there was a part of you that wanted to go through the medical transition specifically to prove to your parents that it wasn't a phase. So I'm wondering, how important do you think it is to have a healthy father son dynamic when it comes to either preventing this kind of thing from happening or at least being able to navigate it in a healthier way? And you can speak on just healthy parent relationships in general, or if you have any specific insights about the father son dynamic specifically.
Yeah. Oh man, like it's hard to describe my relationship with my father. I would say it's really, really good as it is right now, but he's just not very good at communicating. Like he barely talks, right? And he only talks in like social situations during like parties and things like that. But in general, he's not that good at communicating. I also think both of us felt really uncomfortable around this subject, around this topic, and I think it was really uncomfortable for both of us to talk about it, and it was very hard to like establish proper communication and relationship for many years because of that. Well, what can fathers do better? I think, yeah, being good at communicating, and I know it's like a very ambiguous statement when I'm saying be good at communicating. What does that mean? What is like a satisfactory good there, right? I think most people are to some degree bad at communicating, right? It is a skill you have to work on, And I think this, well, if something like this happens when your child comes out as trans, I think this is a good opportunity to work on your communication skills. Um, I've made a video on how to talk to your trans child. I think 2 months ago, something like that. And you know, one advice I give to parents is that the best thing you can do is to not affirm everything your child says, but also do not be way too antagonistic towards their desire to transition. If you're coming across as judgmental, if you refuse to use the pronouns they prefer, it will be much harder for them to trust you. And if that relationships is already broken because of that, establishing communication and trust would be much more difficult. So I think establishing trust is one of the most important things. Like they have to know that you have their best interest in mind, and if there's anything, even a small thing, in a lot of teenagers with gender dysphoria mind, there's this idea that even like the slightest disagreement there about something may be read as hostility, when it really doesn't have to be, right? You're not necessarily hostile, but well, your kid can read it that way.
Yeah, you definitely want to. And I see this in some of my own family, like with my stepdad and my little sister. It's kind of turned into that sort of combative relationship where it doesn't really matter what his opinion is anymore because she's just actively rebelling against him. Do you feel like you were kind of actively rebelling against your father or your parents in general?
Uh, yeah, I think some of degree of that was definitely present. I don't think it was the driving force behind my decision, but I think I always had a rebellious nature of of sorts. Yeah, I always like to break the boundaries, push the limits, things like that. I've some of that still lives within me to this day. I just found a different, more reasonable and responsible way to do that. But I don't necessarily think it's a bad quality to have. It's more about where you are directing that.
Definitely. So I want to shift the conversation now to a different set of topics. I do want to get your opinion on the seemingly bottomless list of gray areas that seem to pop up around this topic. But first, I kind of started to pick up on an interesting thread, and I'm not entirely sure where it leads, but I do want to follow it and kind of see where we end up. So I actually just did a podcast on the kind of like nihilistic ways of thinking, and I was digging into some of your earlier videos, and I came across a video where you explain why you are no longer consider yourself an antinatalist. And just for the listeners, antinatalism is basically when you believe that the earth or human race would be better off if they stop having children. It would lead to less suffering. And as I was watching you lay out that belief system that you no longer subscribe to, I was connecting some dots, and you can tell me if there's anything here. I'm not sure where that belief system falls within your timeline, whether it was pre
Okay.
or post detransition. But either way, and I do apologize if this is too blunt, but
Mm.
basically after your surgery, you essentially lost the ability to create children. And I'm wondering if this belief system or any nihilistic belief system that any trans person could adopt was being used as kind of a coping mechanism to sort of like make that irreversible decision a little bit more okay. And the reason I ask this is because clearly you're very intelligent. And my video on nihilism kind of explored the dangers that come with an intelligent mind. Is that something that kind of resonates with you?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, the time I got really interested in antinatalism was, I believe, around 2018. I think from 2018 to 2020, it was just 2 years. And I'm someone who's I'm not scared of exploring ideas and ideologies. What I like to say a lot of the time is that I'm going to flirt with any idea out there. No matter how extreme it is, I'm going to entertain it at least. Not I don't ever like dismiss ideas. So what usually happens is that you sort of sort through good ideas and bad ideas, and a lot of the time, if an idea is bad, you sort of like leave it behind. Like, okay, I played around with it. Don't agree with it, right? But there are some ideas and some opinions I have that I have had in many years, and those usually stay. And I think that's a good way to separate those good ideas from bad ideas. So I think there was a part of it that was sort of like coping, right? Like, I can't have kids anymore. So if you sort of make it a voluntary thing, like I don't want to have kids, and to be honest, I don't really. There was a point in my life, from like 2020 to early to 2023, where I wanted to have kids, just like subconsciously something happening in my brain that just tells me I should have kids, But I came to the conclusion that I don't think that is something I actually want. It was more like just my biology telling me what I should want. But I don't think I'd make a good parent, to be honest. So I'm happy with that, to be honest. But there was definitely some level of coping. But the main reason I abandoned antinatalism is because, well, when you think about it, it is a sort of an ideology that works on paper. I mean, yeah, you would reduce suffering, perhaps like eliminate it altogether if there were no humans or no living beings. But well, how do you achieve that? You cannot stop absolutely everyone from reproducing, and at the best you can stop a lot of people from reproducing, and then what happens is that we end up with a lot of elderly people, very few members of new generations to support the elderly, which actually leads to more suffering. So the best attempts at reducing suffering through antinatalism is only going to amplify suffering. And I just think it's sort of a paradox where it's an idea that works on paper, but with the value of antinatalism when it comes to putting it in practice is actually very, very low. There's very little value to that. And I think ideas, in order to be good, they have to offer something of value in practice, right? And if they cannot do that, they're really worthless in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Okay, so now that we've kind of got through some of the hard stuff, I have a list here of basically five provocative statements.
Okay.
And they're statements that I don't necessarily believe or disbelieve, but they're just kind of designed to highlight the various gray areas within the trans topic. So I'll say the statement and you just let your mind go wherever you want with it. So the first one is sex reassignment surgery should be illegal.
I wouldn't say it should be illegal, because if that happens, I fear that the black market would actually take control over that, which could lead to more like uncontrolled development in there. And I think as long as there are like official medical sources who work with that, there's opportunity for developing better medicine and better technology to avoid complications in the future. And I think that's what we should be focusing on. So no, I don't think it should be illegal, but I think we should be talking a lot about it to discourage people from taking those surgeries. I think we should be just portraying the brutal realism of just how wrong those surgeries can get, and that they are not really affecting what they're trying to offer, I think it's a scam basically, because you're not really getting what you're paying for, unless you know exactly what's the best result. If you have complete understanding of what the best result can be and what the worst result can be, and you still decide to do that, fine. But I think having awareness of that is really, really important to have.
So the next statement is children shouldn't transition under any circumstances.
Um, Well, depends how you look at it. What do you mean by transition? I think that it's okay for kids to wear whatever clothes they want. Actually, I think that limiting the child's ability to try those things may actually lead to unnecessary transition, because they might be thinking, "Oh, I want to dress in clothes like this, but I cannot because there is this limitation put on me on what I can and can't wear." I think this really, in a lot of kids especially, it creates this curiosity. Like you want to step in on the other side, see what's there. And I think there are healthier way to satisfy that curiosity than transitioning medically. So if your kid is showing interest in perhaps dressing or expressing themselves in a way that is not usually associated with their gender, well, maybe they are trans, maybe they have gender dysphoria, or maybe they're just gender non-conforming, a feminine type of homosexual, or a butch lesbian. There are like endless different possibilities of what they can be. I don't think we should be forcing identity on kids, but I also don't think we should be limited their freedom to find themselves and express themselves. When it comes to puberty blockers, in most cases I'm opposed to it. I think it's absolutely unnecessary in most cases. I don't think doctors should be pushing puberty blockers. I think there are some extreme cases, right, where puberty blockers can lead to less depression, to them doing better at school, to them having a better social life if they do not go through through the natural puberty. If their gender dysphoria is very, very intense, I think that's the case when we really need to weigh the good and the bad with the results of puberty blockers. So I'm not 100% opposed to that, that there is no case when it's needed, but I think most cases really, really don't need that. And we also have to think about, well, what can be the negative effects of puberty blockers, right? So um, if and that's especially the case for males, like trans women, like those young kids, those girls, if they actually go on puberty blockers, they might be unable to ever experience an orgasm in the future because of that. It really affects the development of your sexuality, also affects the development of your brain as well. I think it's important for your development to go through puberty. And if you go through your natural puberty, you discover your sexuality, that might also help you realize that perhaps transitioning is not the right choice for you. Perhaps you feel better in your body. Perhaps you found yourself as homosexual or bisexual because of puberty. I think it can be helpful in many cases. Now, let's weigh in what can be positive with puberty blockers in some cases. Like I said, it can improve someone's mental health, how they do at school, their social life, and so on. But um, I think you also are likely to pass better at the opposite sex, right? Which means that you're probably going to experience much less discrimination in the future. But I also think that this is not how we should solve this problem by giving kids puberty blockers just to pass. Instead, I think we should be creating more acceptance in society that not everyone has to be up to those standards of what a man or a woman should look like. I think that is a much better solution to the problem, really, and it's sort of a beauty standard. that is being monetized, if you really think about it. And then, if for females at least, trans men, if they get no, sorry, if they get puberty blockers at a very early age, they perhaps may not have to take top surgery later on to remove their breasts, which means less scarring, less surgeries in the future. So I think it's a very gray area, and I think that there are exceptions to the rule, but normally I'm not for kids going on puberty blockers in most cases.
And with surgeries, would you say no surgeries for anyone under 18? Do you think that would be a good rule?
Yes, 100%. I don't think surgeries should be performed on anyone under 18, considering that, well, out of all the ways you can transition, this is the most irreversible ones.
Okay, so the next statement is you should always use someone's preferred pronouns.
Um, I would say yes. That's what I'm doing personally, but I'm also not imposing that on others. I don't think we should be necessarily forcing people. And even okay, let's entertain the idea that I'm trans, um, which I, well, kind of was for a while, but even back then, my idea was that if I encounter someone who does not want to call me my preferred pronoun, that's a cue to me that I should avoid them. Like, why should I be trying to force you to use that pronoun and have those interactions when they are uncomfortable for me, they're uncomfortable for you? Let me stay out of your way, you stay out of my way. That's my take on that. I'm a big fan of freedom of speech, so I don't think we should be telling others how they should refer to others. But I think it's a way to show respect to another individual. And if you want to establish communication, like proper dialogue with people on the other side, I think the best way to do it is by being respectful. Um, I think a good first step would be if non-trans people started calling trans people by their preferred pronouns, and in return, trans people stopped using the word cis. And I think that could be an interesting compromise, but will we get there? Likely not in the near future, at least, if you ask me.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard line for some people to cross. I
Yeah.
know. But you said something in a previous video that I thought was interesting. So I've never actually had anybody ask me to call them by a different pronoun. I mean, I've interacted with some trans people, but that conversation just never came up. But you said something in relation to like Buck Angel, because he's clearly passing. And if I were to just walk up to him on the street, I would assume that he was a man. So, in
Mm.
relation to like, I would probably just call him a man and he, just because that's like what my brain is automatically registering him as. So, I wouldn't go out of my way to call him his biological gender. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think that's the way most people's brains work. Like, you see a person, and within a matter of 1 or 2 seconds, your brain is sort of making an assertion of whether they're a man or a woman, right? Based on what you're perceiving. And based on that perception, that perception creates the pronoun that is more natural for you to use. So I think if you are trying to go against that instinct, I think that's when you're sort of going out of your way to try to use someone as pronoun. I mean, in most cases, I go by what feels instinctually right to me, how I perceive people. Like you'll never find me asking people about their pronouns, but if someone tells me like what they want me to call them, I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with that. And in general, I don't really like it when people ask me what my pronouns are, because a lot of the time that makes me feel like they do not perceive me as a man for some reason. So I don't like those interactions. If someone starts with that question, I like uh, already a little uncomfortable, to be honest.
Yeah, I get the same feeling. I'm not sure what it is, but it's almost just like kind of a wokeness that comes along with
Yeah.
it, and I just don't really like that very much. But so the next
Can
statement
I just
is,
comment
oh yeah,
on
sure,
that?
go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, I think the intention is there that, or by asking people what their pronouns are, you're being respectful to a very, very small minority who might have an alternative pronoun or something like that. But they don't take into consideration that this may also feel offensive to some trans people who do not wish to be asked that question, because that makes them feel like they're not passing when you ask them. And even I, have someone who detransitioned, whenever I get this question, something in my head tells me like, I still appear as female, right? And I really, I don't think I do. It's very rare for me to encounter someone who thinks I'm a woman at this point. But yeah, generally, I think it creates more uncomfortable feelings to more people than it actually benefits.
Yeah, I agree. So the next statement is gender is assigned at birth.
Oh, if gender is assigned at birth, well, not in the same way that your name is assigned, right? Like your name is something that your parents choose for you based on absolutely nothing but just what they want to call you, right? Um, well, when the doctors are telling your parents if you're a girl or a boy, it's not like they're making that statement out of their own wishful thinking. It's an observation, really. I think sex is observed, not assigned. Well, it can be wrong in some cases, right? I mean, there were several cases of girls being born perfectly normal with normally looking female genitals. And they may not find until much, much later on in their teenage years that they have XY chromosomes. Like they don't get periods and so on. Um, of course, those cases are quite rare, but yeah, I don't think it's like 100% perfect. I don't think you can make correct observation in every single case, but in general, I would say that sex at birth is observed, not assigned.
So the last one is gender dysphoria is a mental illness.
Yes, I think so, absolutely. And a lot of people could consider that to be offensive to someone if you say that, but I think we should destigmatize mental health. Like there is nothing wrong with being mentally ill other than the likely discomfort and suffering that is causing you. And I the definition of mental illness is a mental or psychological abnormality that makes it either harder for you to function, or it creates a degree of suffering for you, right? And I think what I've observed with gender dysphoria is that it is certainly creating suffering in an individual experiencing that. Of course, some mental illnesses can also cause suffering to people around them, right? Borderline personalities disorder, narcissism, sociopathy are just few examples of such illnesses that actually cause also harm to people around you. But my general take is that anything that is mental and causes suffering or makes it harder for you to function could be considered a mental illness. I also think that mental illness can also be very, very temporary. A lot of the time, when we're experiencing grief, for example, we don't really think of that as mental illness. Like mental illness is something permanently. When something is permanently, well, I wouldn't really use that word, but a lot of people would say wrong with you. Um, But when it comes to physical health, not all physical illness has to be chronic, right? There are, well, you can have a cold or flu and get better after a week, right? And I think it's the same with mental illness. I think that uh, teenage boys who are experiencing gynecomastia, like abnormal growth of breast tissues, right? I think they can also experience gender dysphoria towards their own body, right? That isn't really that much different from a trans man who's also developing breast tissue. So from the way I see it, they both would experience a form of mental illness, and mental illness can have a physical source. Actually, and a lot of the time it does. It's chemical composition. Sorry, I lost words there. Yeah, like
Composition?
yeah, composition. Sorry, chemical composition in your brain, which can be temporary or permanent.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your opinion on those five gray areas. And I think we'll start to wrap things up here. But before we do, I wanted to give you a chance to speak a little bit about the book that you're writing. I'm an aspiring author as well. And I think just kind of by accident, everyone that I've interviewed has either written a book or is in the process of writing a book.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that my channel is focusing in on this theme of writing books, especially with how hard it can be to get people to notice your writing. So I know your book is about the philosophy of technological advancement. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about why that topic has captivated you so much, and
Mm,
also when do you think you'll complete the book?
right. Actually, I'm writing two books at the time, and the book on the technological development or technological evolution, I wrote approximately 60% of that book already. But I decided that I want to write a book on the topic of detransition first. So this is the one I'm prioritizing, but I'm actually working on both. The plan is to finish the book on the topic of detransition like next year. I'd like to publish it in 2025, and then I'm likely to finish the book on technology in 2026. And I also think that it will be much easier to break through on the book market with a book on the topic of the transition, because it's a much harder topic, but I also think it's more of a temporary topic. Like it's hard right now, and it will be in the next few years. The topic of technological evolution may not be as hot right now, but I think it will. It's a slow growth, really. It's more of a marathon. So I think it would be beneficial to publish a book on the topic of detransition first. But yeah, regarding your other question, my interest in this subject, I've started developing interest in philosophy fairly early. I would say around the time when I was 11, 12. I think it started with Greek philosophers for me, but I also had a lot of interest in the concept of time, which at the time I thought really was concerned with astrophysics, but it's also a topic of philosophy. I think there's a big overlap between philosophy and astrophysics, and because I have interest in both, I sort of found a way to combine those. And eventually also developed interest in technology, and I think that the connection between technology and our culture, the way humans are interacting with philosophy with technology, I think it can tell a lot about our condition as humans, as humanity, and in which way technology is what allowed us to sort of take control of our course. I think it allowed us also to rise above our biological limitations, and will proceed to do so in the future. But also the way we transform nature through the use of technology, I think is very, very fascinating. I like to think of technology on a more cosmic level, in terms of universal principles and energy density, progressive acceleration, and growth in complexity, and so on. My goal is to provide a pretty nuanced look of how technology has developed. Why is it developing? Is that development deterministic? And what can we do to make sure that in both near and far future we are developing a technology that is benefiting humanity instead of causing harm? So harm reduction and beneficial potentiality, you could say.
Thanks for sharing that with us. I think you laid out a good description of kind of the dynamic that a lot of authors face, which is kind of the urge to follow their passion and kind of the urge to fit in with the market. So I think that will be very relatable to people listening to this. And as a parting gesture, I think when you're done with the book, if you'd be interested in having someone read it and interview you about it for either book, I'd be more than happy to extend that offer
Oh,
to you.
yeah, yeah. After I publish the first book, just reach out to me, send me an email, and yeah, we can talk some more.
Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks again for speaking with me today. I'll definitely continue following your channel and watching the content that you put out.
Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.